trees teach us what it means to be resilient. In spring, trees are full of hope and potential. The leaves are growing, the limbs bearing fruit. And as it inevitably does, time brings change. Summer comes, continuing the pattern of growth and joy. This reflects our lives, right? There are times when the world around us seems full of life, everything is going well. Then fall arrives. There's less light, things are a little harder, but it's manageable. The leaves are changing colors as the trees cope with changing circumstances, the change in light. And then winter comes. Just as it comes to the tree, there are times when it comes to all of us. By winter, the leaves have fallen. It feels like the tree has died, although we know it has gone dormant. The tree is doing what it can to survive the winter. And we've all had times like that. The times of winter when it feels like life has been sucked from the world and everything has died. But trees are resilient. Supported by the world around them, the sun, the soil, the air, they find their way into spring. Winter wasn't death after all. Life continues, and it always will. Resilient communities are the same way. Resilient communities will always face hard times, but they are moving forward to a goal beyond the challenge or pain. Resilient communities can anticipate or respond to change and disruptions, whether minor or massive, subtle or sudden. But being resilient doesn't always mean it will be easy. It doesn't mean things won't feel uncomfortable for the organization or the people within it. I'd like to do a little experiment in resiliency with you today. I want you to take just a few minutes and move. Gather up your things, find a new seat in the sanctuary, inside the sanctuary. And now, if you have physical limitations around this exercise, I support you respecting them. I'm going to remember this brought more people to the front. Just telling you, you might have taught me the wrong lesson. It's like, we could just go sit back down. So, how was that? Bad, refreshing. Bad, refreshing. Okay, fine. What'd you say, Nina? Refreshing, new perspective. Anybody else?
Weird to sit on this side.
Weird to sit on a different side. Yes. Anybody else? One more. I got you guys already. One more that hasn't spoke. Fun. We're going to end with fun. I'd like to tell you just for a moment what I saw during that time. I saw you supporting one another. I saw you laughing. I saw you sort of negotiating where you would go and figuring it out. Only Virginia might have been the only person who knew we were moving. So for most of you, this was unexpected. And you figured it out. I might have seen one or two glares, but that's understandable. It might have been from the boys. And I saw you joining the minister in this weird experiment. even though you aren't sure what I'm going to ask you to do next. I know moving to a different spot can be disconcerting, especially if you're used to where you sit. And as a resilient people, it's important for us to practice with small changes so we're prepared for the big ones. What will we as a community do if we're ever faced with bigger challenges? I want to come back to that in a moment, but first I want to tell you about a congregation that was faced with one of the biggest changes and how they responded. We experimented together with losing our comfortable, or at least familiar, seats, and a sister church of ours lost so much more. On October 8, 1871, when our congregation was just 15 years old, a small barn in Chicago belonging to the O'Leary family caught fire. Over the past 3 months, the city had received only 1 inch of rain. The drought, coupled with the use of wood buildings across the city, meant that the fire raged out of control. At that time, Chicago had 324,000 residents. When it started to rain late on October 9th, a Monday, the fire was close to burning itself out. 2,112 acres had burned. 17,500 buildings were destroyed. And the fire did $200 million worth of damage. The Unity Church, a Unitarian church, now called Second U, burned to the ground, leaving only a part of the outer wall and tower. Their baptismal font and the minister's anvil survived. Reverend Robert Collier lost his library, the tragedy there, and most of the members lost their homes. That Sunday, the people came to church. One story says that Reverend Collier, who had been a blacksmith in England, stood on his anvil, and the members of the church gathered together in the ashes of their sanctuary and worshiped. Can you imagine that? Over 100,000 people had become homeless in the course of 2 days. 300 people had died, and these people came together to worship in the ashes of their beloved church. When winter comes into our lives, when it feels like all life is gone, this is when we need one another the most. This is when we need religion the most. We need the ability to come together on a Sunday to stand in the ashes of all that we have loved and worship. We can't be resilient alone. It doesn't happen in isolation. The tree doesn't grow new leaves by itself. It needs the light to return. It needs soil and water. You get the idea. In 1871, help poured in from across the world. Unitarian churches in Europe and across the U.S. sent assistance to Unity in Chicago. I'm sure churches like this one helped as well. Reverend Collier used his anvil to make things to sell as a part of fundraisers for the church. And as a reminder of what they survived together, the congregation uses that anvil as their chalice even today. I don't know that if you can see it, but it's at the back center. That's the very same anvil. The fire wasn't the only challenge Unity Church faced in their history. In fact, in another congregational winter time, they renamed themselves Second Unitarian, not because there was a first Unitarian, but to represent their capacity for renewal, for second chances. Being together as a religious community means being together for something greater than our individual lives, greater than the familiarity of how things look for us right here and now. And we learn together with one another how to be resilient. We have the chance to practice together And when winter comes, we can support and we can love each other. Anne Green shared with me a story of this congregation's own experience of winter. She says, during the 1930s depression, our church fell on hard times. But one person, Dora Bernstein, was the savior of this church. When there was no minister during those dark years, she did everything to keep the doors open, and they never closed. She was the one who saw there was wood for the stoves in the church. She paid the dues to the national organization and the insurance on the building. She brought in student ministers and guest ministers and started camps for children 10 and older. She arranged speakers, classes, and swimming. I'm grateful to Anne for sharing that story. I don't know where she is anymore. There she is. I knew where she was at the beginning. In that period, Dora supported the church. She kept people moving together. She helped us respond to winter until new life was ready to grow. And I'd like to offer that even though we were in the dark times, what Dora and the people in the congregation did was more than just survive. They held camps for children. They had speakers and classes that brought people together during a challenging time for the entire country. She brought in student and guest ministers who helped members of the congregation worship together, but also this helped train ministers that would go into other congregations and sustain our wider faith tradition. Dora and the members of the church during that time were ready to respond to the dark years. What skills do we have now to be ready for the winter times, whatever those might look like? And what do we still need to develop to be ready? So here's your second surprise. I want you to take just a couple more minutes to talk about that to a person or two who is sitting next to you. In what ways are we already ready to respond to challenges as individuals and as an organization? And what do we need to develop? What skills do we need to develop to be more prepared? So there's two questions there. Got them? What do we already have? What do we need to develop? Okay, take just a couple more seconds and wrap up your sentence. A couple of ideas. What do we already have that will get us through any sort of dark times? Each other, creativity. Anybody else? I heard love over here. Money. Dedicated membership. We have ourselves. Nice. Okay, what skills do we need to develop still to help us? Think about it. Anybody else? More outreach.
Trust in passing things on to the next person.
Trust in delegating. Is that a good summary?
Well, when somebody goes off with a committee or out of a particular role, they need to have trust that the next person will learn it and ability to pass forward what they've learned.
Trust that others can step into leadership. Anybody else? Non-anxious presence, the ability to stay calm. One more.
Being very nice to others.
Being very nice to others. Perfect. In the dark years, Dora had a vision. She knew the value of this church. She knew what we could offer people in that time and far into the future. She was looking out for us too. 90 years later, we're the recipients of her efforts. As an individual, she was resilient, she was focused, and she was a leader. But she wasn't attending church alone. She was supported by and worked with others. Above all, and I know many of you have heard this from me, we need a mission. We need a purpose for being together. We need something to guide us forward, even when winter comes. Our spiritual ancestors were brought together to worship God. Is that the case now? For many of you it is. For others it is not. So what brings us all together as a community? If everything burned, would we come on Sunday and stand in the ashes to worship? Yes, I believe we would. The core of this church is the compassion you have for one another. Remember, when winter comes into our lives, when it feels like all life is gone, this is when we need one another the most. And this is when we need religion the most. We need the ability to come together on a Sunday. And how do we cultivate that? First, continue what you're doing. Reach out to one another. Offer support and love. Laugh and help one another when the minister throws unexpected experiments at you. Offer your passion and interest to this church. Beth, one of our newer members, has been drawing and developing her artistic talent. It's her chalice that is on the front of the order of service today, which I'm going to start crediting that on the back, just FYI. Anne, Lynn, Gretchen, and Monica are devoting significant time, more than they have, I suspect, to searching for our next minister. Vic, Alice, and Lynn are keeping our building going. Vicki, as we mentioned, has been watching our children for 24 years. And I could go on for quite some time. We're a community of people who love one another. We've found value in what we have here together. And we can strengthen our ability to be resilient by getting involved in the care of this church and of each other. Communities don't recover from the work of just one person, even when someone leads the way. Leadership can be shared. We can each play a role. Join a committee, volunteer for religious education, help with coffee hour, become a worship associate, hint, or restart the social justice committee. We can pledge our resources thoughtfully during the upcoming pledge campaign. begins March 1st. One important way to be resilient in hard times is to cultivate a strong, connected community in other seasons. When things are going well, we can take time to focus on who we are as a church and where we are going. Keeping an eye on what we offer one another and the community around us is what we need to get through any dark years that might be in the future. We know winter times will come, and we don't have to live in fear of them. When we've spent the spring and summer and fall gathering resources as a community, we can look forward with hope, knowing that this church is valuable, not only because of where we've been in our past, but also because of what we have to offer to the future. My beloved spiritual companions, we need to support and love one another through the unexpected and the anticipated challenges. When winter comes, I hope you will know that you can come here, even if it means we stand together in the ashes of all that we have loved and understood to worship. The gift we offer is companionship. As we walk through winter times, we won't be alone. Together, we will move towards spring. May it be so. Amen.